Harry Crabtree had just seen his beloved Villa lose 2-3 in the 88th minute and was terrified of the certainty that they would remain in the bottom three for the next 2 weeks. Just then he felt his Palm PDA vibrate, indicating that he had received an email. Glancing at his buddy Gary, who was using Harry's wife's season ticket for the game, he apologized, "I'll have to check that out." Harry's wife was absent from this game due to last-minute shopping for a wedding gift for her best friend Karen's granddaughter and other pre-wedding shopping, but otherwise she didn't miss a match. However, preparations for her friend's church wedding at Christmas were entering a crucial stage. She was probably the one who was now asking if she could spend a ridiculous amount of money on something. Harry and his wife knew he would approve anything she asked for, but she would still call him to ask, just as he would call her if he wanted permission to buy a new set of golf clubs. It was little things like that that cemented a good marriage, and Harry thought he had a great one. He pulled out his Palm and checked the message. It wasn't from the landlady, but from someone named Kaylee.Wilson@hostname.com whom he had never heard of before. He opened it, holding his breath as the message unfolded before his eyes. "You don't know me, Mr. Crabtree, but I worked in Mrs. Crabtree's office as a summer intern and I have no doubt that she was having an adulterous affair with a coworker. I am a Christian and cannot let this sin go unchallenged. I'm sorry, I don't want sad news." Almost automatically, he took off his gloves and typed a short reply on his thumbs. 75-year-old Harry was in shock. The last 2 minutes of the match were a blur as he waited for an answer, thoughts of his 64-year-old wife and almost 30 years of marriage flashing before his eyes. From the spring of 1976 until October 2005, that is 29.5 years, I thought Gina and I were a tightly committed couple and the centerpiece of a loving family. When I learned of her infidelity, on that fateful day in 2005, I resigned from all boards of directors and severed all contact with Kings. I was only glad that Gina's sweet parents would no longer be disappointed by her betrayal. Chapter 1. Saturday, October 2, 2005, 1729 hours. I tried calling a dozen times in the last half hour, as soon as I left the built-up area around Aston Villa and got on the freeway. Usually, on those rare occasions when Gina wasn't attending matches with me, our season ticket seats were next to each other, I expected her to answer. Now that every businessman or businesswoman carried a cell phone and was ready to answer even if they were in the middle of shopping, I increasingly feared the worst, that this was not a one-off attempt but time stolen by lovers from our anticipated day together. I stopped at a service station, copied the message I had received and emailed it to her, adding, "Is this true?" 10 minutes passed before my phone rang. It was her. "Harry. Answer the question, Gina, is it true?" "Yes, but..." "Goodbye, Gina, I hope you both have a good life." I cut the connection, but Gina kept calling me. I didn't answer, only hit the disconnect button a couple times. She was texting, calling me over and over. I was on the freeway, but I wasn't going anywhere, and certainly not home. It wasn't home to me anymore. I just needed to do something, anything but talk to Gina. Then she freaking called me again, this time from someone else's number. I answered. We need to talk," she said. I hung up and tossed the phone on the passenger seat. I felt it was urgent, so I pulled over to the hard shoulder. I picked up my phone, which rang again, walked over to the corrugated guardrail, and tossed it as far as I could into the unlit blackness of the empty roadway. Almost immediately after it left my hands, I realized that I would have a hard time contacting my 2 children because their numbers were written down on that phone and nowhere else. I knew that Sophia Elizabeth's work number was on my laptop in the trunk of my car because she worked at King & Son when her children left home shortly after the divorce. She must have had other numbers as well. My oldest son, Gerald, was in his 50s, still teaching math and completely indifferent to me. Sophia would talk to him on my behalf. My adopted son Giles was at work by Monday listening to his mother's story. Giles was vice chairman of Gina's company. Bobby and Maisie had their own lives and could contact me through Sophia Elizabeth. Oddly enough, they never did. Gina must have told her side of the story before I did, and they believed her. Sophia Elizabeth could still occasionally write me letters through the mailbox number I sent her in a message a few days later. I was able to pick up the letters when I went to this town every 2 weeks to do some shopping. She was the only family member who made an effort to contact me. For the first couple years she sent me a card and a letter for my birthday, and then a card and a letter for Christmas. Eventually I gave her my zip code and the number 3, my number on the cottage door. None of the family came to visit me. I left no forwarding address, so I received no letters, no bills, not even divorce papers. All in all, since October 2005, I have led the life of a bitter recluse. Chapter 2. Sunday, February 5, 2015, 1,525 hours. Having parked the Rolls-Royce at the farm, I had only been in the cottage for half an hour and had only time to light the wood burner in the living room and put the electric kettle on for a mug of tea. I sat on the back veranda, well wrapped up against the cold, watching the sunset glistening on the ice-covered canal, warming my hands on the tea and thinking about what I would make for dinner. At my age, 84, and I'll be 85 in the spring, I didn't like to eat late at night. It's so quiet where I live that I could hear someone crunching down the frozen path, which wasn't the smartest decision when the path was covered with 6 inches of fresh snow on top of 6 inches of ice that had frozen days before, and the natural curve of the path was designed to divert water into an already deeply frozen canal. Walk on the grass near the fence, away from the canal, it's safer that way. I stood up and shouted to the pedestrian. He waved back at me and thankfully moved away from the edge where the ice beneath him was less compacted. Now I could see that it was a woman, and she was dragging a wheeled suitcase behind her with difficulty. No way, I thought. I literally talked to this woman for a few minutes during lunch, for the first time in 10 years. We made a truce, and I invited her to come and visit me anytime. True, I didn't tell her where I lived. I supposed she would agree to it in the spring or summer, not in the midst of a severe frost. And with her suitcase, it looks like she's going to stay. I went down to the garden and met her at the back gate. I had already swept and salted the stone path because, although I rarely left the garden through the gate, except to inspect the beehives, I often started my daily 10-kilometer run this way, around the backyard and ending at the cottage entrance, but entering through the back door. The front door opens directly into my bedroom and is covered with an inner thick wool curtain to reduce drafts. You might think that running 10 kilometers a day in my 80s is a remarkable feat, but our local running club had many keen runners my age and older. And I kept fit all my life, although I didn't seriously pursue road running until I left Gina and moved here 10 years ago. As soon as she appeared at the gate, all hat, coat and scarf, almost unrecognizable, I took the handle of the suitcase from her gloved hands and lifted it. It was light, so at least she hadn't brought the kitchen sink with her. She followed me into the kitchen and shook the snow off her boots inside instead of outside. I blame it on her upbringing. The big houses she lived in always had shoe rooms in the back and housekeepers to clean up after them. I set her suitcase on the floor while she took off her hat, scarf, and gloves, and I got a mop and bucket out of the closet to clean up after her. Brrr. It's so cold out there. You could have warned me about that treacherous path, Gina complained during our second conversation in the last 10 years. I almost fell into the canal twice. And when I didn't see your car in the parking lot, I wondered if I had the wrong address or if you'd gone somewhere and might not be back for hours. I couldn't get a signal on my phone. Then I noticed the frozen canal and Soph said you mentioned you lived right by the canal and I drove on. I suppose you got a mailing address from Sophia Elizabeth? The only daughter who writes to me and, like the rest of my old family, refuses to visit me here? Yes. Well. If you'd written me that you were coming, I'd have given you the zip code of the farmer's yard at the other end of the narrow gauge track that crosses the canal. The farmer there always clears the path of snow and ice, and it's not dangerously close to deep frozen water. Well, since these christenings were the first family event you've been to since. Ever, Gina said, then why did you come to this particular christening after you ignored all the invitations to all the other family members' christenings and weddings? Sophia Elizabeth sends me 2 postcards a year and 2 long letters full of, I suppose, news, though some of them may be begging, I don't know. Sometimes, mostly, the letters are enclosed in postcards, sometimes sent separately. About 8 or 9 years ago I was reading a letter, and on the very first page she started talking about my former first wife. Mavis. Yes, she is. Apparently, reported Sophie Elizabeth, the one I hadn't named in 40 years, was divorcing her second husband. I immediately stopped reading and wrote Sophie Elizabeth back saying that I didn't want anything about ex-wives in her letters, nothing, absolutely nothing, they were no longer my family and I wasn't interested. I told her that if she ever sends another letter with any mention of you or your predecessor, I will. I told her I would stop reading them, all the letters. When I received the next letter, I remember it was Christmas Day, I managed to read half a paragraph about the details of my ex-wife's divorce before I realized what I was reading and that her soon-to-be ex-husband had proof that Mavis had slept with him during the first month of their marriage. They had an open marriage. I didn't care what they had, I didn't want to know. Didn't want to know then, didn't want to know now. I couldn't unread what I had just read. I wrote to Sophia Elizabeth and asked her not to send any more letters or postcards, because I just wouldn't read them anymore or even bother to respond to them. So how did you find out about Christina's christening? I never open letters or birthday cards. I make an exception and open the Christmas card she sends. The farmer brings one every Christmas, and one card by itself looks sad. I never read the letters that come with the card, they are all unopened, still folded and sitting in a drawer in the kitchen. However, the christening invitation was enclosed inside the last Christmas card, without a letter. I hid it behind the clock, where it had lain for the last 5 or 6 weeks. A couple days ago I saw it again and, on a whim, I came into the church and sat in the back as a curious observer. I looked around, saw about 3 babies being baptized, but didn't recognize any of them. After all, I don't know why I went there in the first place, I must have become senile in my old age. I saw you sneak into the back of the church. I knew it was you, even by your shaggy Santa Claus look, by your long white beard. No one was expecting you and no one knew you were there. Have you sneaked into family events before, Harry? No. Never. And you didn't even take the opportunity to see and hold your great-granddaughter in your arms. Well, now that you've figured me out, I didn't want to remain a gimmick, a dinosaur from the past, to a bunch of strangers who may or may not be related to me. What do you mean, not related? I don't know baby Christina's parents at all, even though the mother is supposed to be my granddaughter, they've never visited or written to me, and I haven't seen Sophia Elizabeth and all her family members in the flesh in almost 40 years. I wouldn't know anyone at all, plus now, thanks to Sophia Elizabeth's fucking letter from 10 years ago, I don't know if my ex slept with me for a month after we were married. I don't know if Gerald and Sophia Elizabeth are even my children. Tosh. They're definitely yours, Harry. All 4 of your children look like peas in a pod, your wife's genes are completely smothered by yours, they can't even look up to you. Gerald could be your twin, right down to the beard, though his beard is gray, a little shorter and professionally trimmed by a barber. I don't know, I haven't seen Gerald in about 45 years. When he was about 15 he refused to see me as soon as his mother asked for a divorce. He knows for a fact that I'm not his father. You know what I mean, Harry? He could be your exact double, stubborn as a mule and cuts off his nose for spite, just like you. He's your child, Harry, without the slightest shadow of a doubt. Well, it was written in my will in red ink, no DNA evidence, no share of my vast fortune buried in the basement. That's just vile and cruel, H. Besides, you'll probably outlive him, Gerald is undergoing treatment for prostate cancer. Then perhaps you'll see me at the funeral. I grinned and almost regretted it as soon as the words left my bitter lips. Gina looked at me, but didn't say anything. Then she started looking around the room. Well, it's cozy here, Harry. I got the impression from reading 3 of your sparse, like the shit of a galloping horse, letters to Sophia Elizabeth that your apartment was much smaller than this one. It's smaller, much smaller, Gina. There are 3 cottages in this row, and I only rent the bottom floor at this end of the row, though I have 2/3 of the garden where I keep my beehives. So how many bedrooms do you have here, Harry? 1, plus the living room and this kitchen, 3 rooms and a galley, that's all my blessed possessions. It might make sleeping arrangements awkward or even a little more interesting, Harry. She smiled her flawless smile at me, showing off a perfect set of teeth. Even in her 70s, she still looked stunning. Sure, she'd aged, her face more rugged than it had been 10 years ago when I'd fallen in love with her unconditionally, but she still had that lively spark in her. And probably always would be. Meanwhile, comparatively speaking, though there was never any comparison between Gina and me, she was not my type at all, and I, with my incessant running and meager diet, was just skin and bones, with only the wrinkled skin in between holding all my bits and pieces together. When I foolishly invited you here, Gina, just a few hours ago, I assumed you would come for tea or lunch, in the spring, summer, or early fall, when we could relax in the fresh air and come to some sort of consummation of our relationship and put an end to the current atmosphere of hatred and anger. I never envisioned that you would arrive, ready to spend a night in the middle of winter, when there is at least 6 centimeters of snow outside and tension inside the cottage that you could cut with a knife. Gina, my once dear friend, there is no room at the inn and the unheated annex is full of gardening tools and a workbench. You wouldn't throw the poor girl out on the street on such a dark, cold night, would you, Harry? I don't think you fit the broad category of poor girl in any dictionary I know of, Gina. I'm poor at being denied intimacy with people I really care about, Harry. I've been lonely for a long time. Were you lonely here, miles away from anywhere? I thought perhaps that was why you came out of hiding and came to our church. Yeah, meeting your mortal enemy on holy ground, huh? No, I'm just curious. I enjoy my own society, Gina. I am a fully qualified and practicing hermit. This shack is my hermitage, my celibate monastic cell away from the sexual greed of humanity. Only you crossed this threshold by invitation, and I already regret it. So I'm never alone, and I've also adjusted and made a few, very few, new friends. What kind of friends? Gina, we've been broken up for years, 10 years to be exact, and you have no right to ask me who my friends are since I don't even pretend to be interested in any of your friends. My friends are the neighbors, Harry, the girls at the gym and the sports center. No one close to me. I assume you're friends with all your neighbors? No, not at all. The old lady at the opposite end of the terrace lives on the first floor with 50 old cats, and fresh cats seem to follow her home regularly. That's why there are never any birds in my garden, and I'm forever shoveling her bloody cat poop out of my vegetable and fruit beds and throwing it back over the fence. And the guy who lives in the middle cottage, the one with all the rooms upstairs, grows his own weed in at least one of the back bedrooms, so no, I don't have much in common with him either. Interesting neighbors you have, H. No, Gina, they're pretty boring compared to the interesting and no doubt ever-changing social circles you probably revolve around. I hardly see anyone now, H, since I had to step aside and force Giles to run the company against his will. Yes, I heard, I continued to receive email newsletters long after I refused any contact with the board. Then you know I was fired. You got me fired for violating company policy on employee relations, Harry, that was vindictive. I've worked for Kings and Tremblets Group all my life. Well, what kept popping into my head was the BBC interview you did on the Women at the Top of the Industry series. I think it was just 2 weeks before I was told about your long-standing love affair. It wasn't a love affair, she barely audibly muttered. And how you told the audience that you needed the support of your family, a loving husband and growing children, to be able to balance business and family, and what a great team we all were together. We were a team, Gina said quietly. I forgot about. You've forgotten a lot, Gina, and I was the only one who thought I was part of the team. You were too busy doing your favors. And you lied to me for 18 months. No, it wasn't that long, and I didn't exactly lie. When I tracked her down and told her what hubby was up to, Mrs. Vatchername confronted her husband and he confessed to her that the affair had been going on for so long. Maybe it's been that long, it's not like I was watching the calendar. But you didn't need to burn poor Julian, he had a family, 3 small children. Harry, you completely destroyed him. No, Gina, you destroyed poor Mr. Vathasface as soon as you started fucking him. His wife kicked him out and I hope she took him to the cleaners. As an ex officio board member responsible for group and company policy, including employee relations, I thought I should tell your precious board of directors what was going on and that they had better prepare for the storm of shit in the market caused by this fallout. It was shortly before I resigned from the board of directors. It's been a nightmare. Firing me, promoting Giles to a job he never wanted. Did you out our son too, Harry? No, I never knew for sure he was gay, but I guess a secret sex life is just part of Th. E. Tremblett family life cycle. First his father Eric fucked his co-workers, then his mother, so being single and secretly fucking consensual men in the ass, even though some of them may or may not be the husbands of poor women, was at least a slight deviation from fucking only your subordinates. Subordinate, I've only fucked one subordinate. But not just once, but regularly for 18 months? How many times? Probably daily Monday through Friday, averaging 4 times a week. For how much? 300 fucks. That guy got a lot more of your precious ass than I did. He was 30 years younger than you, Harry. Yeah, and 20 years younger than his boss. So he was getting 4 times as much pussy as I was, so is it you or him who decided he could cut in on my Saturdays too? And when exactly were you planning on putting me out on the grass to be able to do that stud 7 days and nights a week, huh? Never, he would never leave his wife and family, and this Saturday was just a one-time thing to do in bed, not on the couch in my office. Whose bed? Our bed? No, the hotel bed, it was just sex, Harry. We never loved each other. Was it just sex for you or was he looking for romance? None of us were looking for romance. We were, when it all started, our team was working day and night to get a contract to assemble laptops in our Romanian factory, competing with a rival assembly plant in Indonesia. We just couldn't get wage rates low enough to compete when, almost at the last minute, Julian and his team proposed a robotic assembly line in Finland that, if it worked, would lower costs even in the Far East. The Finnish company had a loan and was struggling to keep up with bank payments. Julian's team of consultants were called in to fix the software and his foreman on site said he had discovered the glitch and asked if we wanted to use the knowledge. We bought the factory and had it fully up and running in a week, ahead of the deadline for a tender to assemble the new laptops. We won the tender and were able to move on and use the plant as a model for other assembly lines. So you fucked him as a reward? No. No, not really. Not really? How do you define not really fucked? Okay, we fucked. It was unplanned and it just happened. We opened bottles of champagne, the team celebrated, but we were all tired. We were relaxed after working so hard under tension. It was a relief from all the tension that had built up. We saved the company, and I sent everyone home happy. Julian stayed behind to help sort out the mess. We were relieved, happy that it was over, and we spontaneously hugged and kissed. And you fucked, didn't you? We fucked, but it was just fuck. We were ashamed, we were both happily married, and we had loved ones at home. But it wasn't just fucking, and you weren't happy enough in your marriage to want something on the side. I assume this was the first time you fucked outside of marriage? Yes. So you made your husband a useless cuckold again. And then you just went on and fucked him another 300 times, by your own admission, and you tell me you only stopped fucking him when I found out about it and kicked you to the curb. I know, and I'm so ashamed and so sorry. I never meant to hurt you. But you hurt me. Once upon a time you stood by me and swore in front of me and our families that you would leave everyone else behind, not that you would make an exception and fuck a worker just for doing a job they are well paid for? Don't you have a bonus system, or do other grandmother CEOs make love to their workers like chickens in a hive? We didn't make love, Harry. I can believe a one-time thing, perhaps, or that you got drunk, did drugs, or in a moment of euphoria from your success, perhaps, but accidentally, out of habit, fuck him 300 times? At the rate we were having sex at the time, that's the equivalent of about 6 years of sex in our marriage. A U.S. study 2 years ago found that the average first marriage lasts 8 years, and divorcing couples on average consider divorce for 2 years before initiating proceedings. So your affair had enough lovemaking for a full-fledged marriage, and it effectively consummated ours. No. What you and I had was lovemaking. With Julian at work, it was just sex, like working out in the middle of the day to build up endorphins. Oh, that's okay then, because really that's all we did at home. We just had sex on the weekends. We never made love, Gina. It's just that I was a much better actor than you or Julian. What do you mean, Harry? You acted like you loved me. Sure. You were just a piece of ass, Gina, and nothing more. Never loved you. Do you understand that? Not once in the nearly 30 years of our marriage have I ever loved you. No. She screamed. At first you were just a pretty ass that I had to fuck regularly to maintain my lavish lifestyle. No, honey, I know you really loved me. You think I'm stupid? No, Gina, I was just living a lie, just like you, getting endorphins to make the weekend go away while I could be home in peace and quiet while you were at work. While that lasted, all was well, but when it ended, well, I discovered that I never missed fucking your flabby old ass, not one bit. And I thought that when the marriage finally ended, I was more upset that Villa had lost the match than that our farce of a relationship had ended. Hey! I thought, so what, it's no big deal. Nothing special, exploded Gina. So what are you complaining about, Axe? You and I, at the time, we were absolutely made for each other. I lied to you for years, you lied to me for years, so we're even. Like I said, it was no big deal to me that we broke up, and I was happy that I wouldn't have to touch your lecherous ass anymore. What the? Her mouth opened and closed. I could see she was confused. Look, let's be adults, we're both tired today. All this arguing between two old farts over a few meaningless hookups that meant nothing in the scheme of things. You're taking the bed for tonight, Gina. I'll sleep in the chair, and when the cold morning comes, you can leave here with your suitcase and go back to your luxurious life. We can go on living our happy, true, completely separate lives ad infinitum and never see each other again, the end. A fairy tale ending where everything ends well. But listen. You took what you wanted out of our marriage while it lasted, Gina. I took what I wanted while it lasted, so we're on equal footing. And if you want to visit me here again, give us a chance to chew the fat, sure, come in the summer, stay all day. There are pleasure boats going through the canal all the time, passing through the lock. Maybe you might even spot a couple of gawky skippers, maybe you can mingle your eyelids and go on one hell of a naughty sea cruise together. You never loved me, did you, Harry? Is that what you're saying? Isn't it obvious, Gina? I'm a salesman, a very good salesman, so in this case I sold myself. And, I must say, very successfully. I lived in a nice house for a while, I had a big garage for my roller, you even bought me a new roller for our 25th anniversary. It's still sitting at home in the garage. See, it all worked out amicably. I didn't need a second roller, I already had one in my name, it was obviously just a bomb on your conscience. You saved your family business, started a new family of a couple of selfish kids who don't care about their old man, and I got some free pussy for almost 30 years. It wasn't as exclusive a freebie as I thought it would be, but all in all, I consider it a win, a damn win. So it wasn't a big deal. No, that's impossible. What can I say? I think I deserved an Oscar for my performance, but I only got Spirit of Ecstasy. No. I can't believe it. Did you really never love me, Harry? Never. Look, babe, you offered me your ass on a platter then, and I took it, thank you very much. What opportunity. You were really sweet back then, so it was mostly all just fun on my part. So that was everything to you? Our marriage? A little fun? Yeah, it's a hell of a lot of fun. Imagine if I'd taken it seriously, I might have ended up with a broken heart, but luckily you were just an easy pussy. I guess I got complacent. I guess I thought I could fool you all the way to the end, but you had me good, and I didn't expect you to start fucking anyone else, not when you're in your 60s. So I have to admit, I was a little pissed off when it was over and I found out that you had gotten yourself a younger rival lover. Julian has never been, I repeat, never been my lover. So what? Look, I was probably pissed that Saturday when I found out. And because Willa had just lost at home, I was miserable and didn't want to talk to you, but you kept calling me and I didn't want to talk, so I threw the phone away while I was driving down the highway. I never even changed it. In fact, I'm still using the very finished laptop you gave me for Christmas, and I never knew that gift was either ironic or a subliminal message about your infidelity with the Finnish factory organizer. I didn't even think. The company was proud of that laptop, we gave away a whole bunch of them that Christmas. There was nothing subconscious about it, honey, honestly. Honestly? Life's a bitch when you find out your partner never really loved you, isn't it? Well, I don't know anything about that, of course, because it only happened to Mavis, but I can imagine it did. You knew what it was because you went through it with Eric, and when you got over it, I became his ready and willing replacement to do what Eric did to you. Was it a kind of revenge on me because you couldn't get back at Eric? No. Absolutely not. Revenge had nothing to do with it. I was just a stupid, unreasonable woman who did a very stupid thing, and it quickly turned into a stupid habit. I wasn't in love with Julian, I was still in love with you. Mrs. What's-Your-Name said she was also in love with Wait-His-Face, and she was very hurt when she found out what hubby shared with his antique boss. Have you talked to Jennifer? Jennifer? Julian's wife, Jennifer? I don't remember names. It's probably due to my age. The old memory banks are full, and the new gray cells in Finland aren't being created by robots to give away for free to simpletons like me, at least not yet. We talked nonstop, me and your Mr. Watch-His-Face landlady, but mostly we were too out of breath to talk much. Apparently the experience of regularly meeting me in person for revenge sex on a regular basis had become cathartic for her. Catharsis or not, she took him back. Really? I asked. I'm surprised. They made up after months apart, I think. For the sake of the kids. I hear they're still together, and he's very successful as CEO of one of our competing companies. We shouldn't have let him go. Did you ever let him go, Gina? Yes, of course, right away. Then I think I know how he feels. I was clearly let go 18 months before I realized it. It's not going to happen again. I'm off this treadmill for good. I was never going to let you go, Harry. You left me, and I want you back. I want you to come home. And I promise I'll never let you go again. And now you're trying to lure me back into your sticky web? No thanks, I'm already home. I've been free from the interference of young women for 10 years now. Of course, I make an exception for Mrs. Whitney. She can interfere with me at any time. I told you, they're still married, they're still together. I guess that's why she stopped coming so often, only. Except? Yeah, the first time she came was when she left her 3 frogs at her sister's for a week. You know, the youngest was only 6 months old and the others were 4 and 2? Your lover was a walking infant, so you were lucky, or maybe you were just overinsured? Anyway, Mrs. What's-His-Name spent the whole week here. She certainly didn't complain about the sleeping conditions, and there wasn't much sleep. I even missed one particular match, I think Villa v Stoke, while I took her virgin ass for the first time. She was still a bit overweight after having her 3rd child, but that was to be expected. She was a little out of shape and a little soft in the middle and her tits were full of milk, but she was itching to lay the ghost of her cheating husband. In the end I was glad she came home even though we were running out of tea, fresh food, blue pills. At this time, Gina stood in front of me and shook her head in bewilderment. No. Oh yes, Mrs. What's-Your-Name only comes twice a year now, on my birthday and the day she said she would never miss the anniversary of our first anal fuck. You bastard. She slapped me as hard as she could, turned and ran into the bedroom, slamming the door behind her. Would you like a cup of tea, sweetheart? I shouted after her. I'll just put the kettle on and make some sandwiches for tea, I don't like to eat late at night. All I heard was a muffled fuck you. That's the trouble with cheaters and liars, they are so bogged down in their fantasies to justify their cheating that they can no longer tell the difference between the truth and a complete fucking pack of lies. I put the kettle on and searched for a teapot among the cupboards, especially where I kept seldom used utensils. I usually made tea for one in a cup, but having company in the house for the first time since I'd moved here 10 years ago required a real teapot, and I knew I had one stashed somewhere. The farmer provided the house, partially furnished by whoever had rented it before me. I could keep what I wanted and throw the rest away. I remembered there was a kettle. I found it by flashlight in the depths of a cupboard. I sliced a couple of plates of sandwiches with homemade jam, all I had for tea, set them on a small tray with a couple of mugs of strong tea, and opened the bedroom door. The last rays of the fading sunset were coloring the snow-covered trees and evergreens outside my bedroom windows overlooking the narrow-gauge railway, but my east-facing bedroom was quite dark at dusk. I set the tray on the bedside table I'd fashioned from old lumber I'd found in the shed outside, and turned on the lamp. Go away, you beast. I've brought tea, drink it while it's hot, because as the sun goes down the temperature here will drop like a stone. There is no central heating in these cottages and in the 1780s they didn't do much insulation, we know for a fact they didn't do any, not even damp proofing, and for warmth there is only a wood-burning stove which I have installed in the sitting room. There's an electric light in the grate, I noticed it when I came in, but it doesn't work. No, it works, I just can't afford the electric bill. I took the fuse out about 10 years ago and put it somewhere in one of the drawers, I forget which one. So, a chair in the living room by a warm stove or a bed in an icy bedroom? Take your pick, but make it quick, because I want to take a shower before it gets too cold, and I always go to bed early in the winter. Then I'll take the chair next to the wood stove. She sat down and made herself comfortable, tucking the other cushions under her and picking up a mug of hot tea. Why, when you say you never have guests except for your fictitious anal fan club, do you have 4 pillows? It's none of your business, my dear ex-wife. Wife. As far as I know, you haven't divorced me, and I certainly haven't divorced you. In that case, my dear second wife from an uncertain string of unhappy marriages, when I rented this cottage. Rented? Why are you renting? We could buy this place for pocket change. You could afford to buy this place, if it were for sale of course, but I certainly can't afford it. So, in case I go on a bender tonight due to the complete depression in my once stable mental state and well-being caused by your premature visit, there's an old 1950s cocoa tin in the kitchen cupboard that holds all my earthly riches. Half of it is yours, I suppose, if we're still married, and the rest is to be divided between my 5 ungrateful children. Mind you, there are more coppers in that tin than bills. And don't spend it all. Remember, the pension is paid 2 weeks in advance and you have to pay back the unused days, and the Department of Work and Pensions always goes to the spouse first. You should have divorced me when you had the chance. Also, in the mornings, Joe the neighborhood junkie usually brings a few eggs and a basket of milk. Don't let him charge you for them because they go to the farmer for free. Joe often has breaks and stops by the farm store at least a couple times a day. He also brings milk for the cat owner. The farmer thinks her 50 cats reduce the mouse population on the crops. You can afford electricity. You have a pension from your job. Yes, I have it as a drawdown pension. I just withdraw as much as I can to stay within the tax threshold along with the state pension. According to the latest statement, it should support me in the way I'm used to until I turn 146. The details are in the top drawer of the sideboard in the living room under all those unread letters from Sophie Elizabeth, in case I don't live to see the date and leave a residue behind. Again, half to you, the rest to be split with the kids after you pay the exorbitant 40% tax on the residue. As for the luxury of my 4 cushions, when I rented the house, it was unfurnished but full of junk. The farmer said anything I could use here was mine and the rest was to be burned. This old iron blanket was lying in pieces, folded up against the wall. I scrubbed off all the rust, repainted and reassembled it, bought a mattress, sheets, blankets, and 2 pillows. You know I like to sleep on 2 pillows, so it was fine. However, after 5 or 6 years, the pillows bunch up and wouldn't inflate anymore, so I bought 2 new ones and put them on top of the other 2 for symmetry. Are you happy with the pillow arrangement now? Yeah, I guess so. She took a tentative bite from one of the jam sandwiches. How delicious, blackberry jam. Blackberries and fall raspberries. I think blackberries are too strong, they grow like weeds here. Do you make your own jam? Yes, and since I keep bees, I use honey instead of sugar to keep the cost down, with a pinch of bicarbonate to reduce acidity. The farmer sells my honey and jam at the farm store. It helps pay for some luxuries. But apparently not razors. I prefer not to shave. You used to look so dapper, but now you look like old Captain Beardsley. I'm old, Gina, worn out by disappointment in my neighbors, more specifically my 2 ex-women. I have spare clean pajamas, if you'd like to use my robe hanging on the door. I'll take a shower first. It's a host privilege, but there's barely enough hot water in the shower for 5 minutes, so get wet, turn it off, lather everything up and rinse off quickly. You start getting wet when the water gets warm, so it will still be hot when you rinse. If you wait for it to warm up before you lather, you'll still be soapy when it cools down. I would use the first 2.5 minutes. I grabbed my old pajamas that were lying on the foot of the bed and a couple towels and a blanket from the chest. I threw 1 towel and blanket on the bed. Just 1 towel, no hair washing in the shower, there's barely enough time for yourself, and you can't wash your hair in the second shower. I'll boil the kettle and you can wash it in the kitchen sink tonight or in the morning when it's warmer. In my pajamas and with a towel over my shoulder, carrying a tray of empty plates and mugs. I walked out of the bedroom and headed for the shower. I took a quick dip, oped up, rinsed off, and got out before the water froze on me. I stood in front of the wood burner in the living room, changed into my pajamas and threw a blanket over me, then shouted to Gina that the shower was free. She rushed past me into the shower, which was next to the kitchen. The tiny toilet was there too, behind a separate door. I put more wood on the burner and then put the kettle on. The kettle boiled and she was still there. Why can't women follow instructions? Am I the only one they ignore? I was filling the hot water bottle when she screamed and jumped out of the shower, naked and covered in soap. I think she tried to lunge at me, but I anticipated her and gave myself a chance to dodge. She slid across the kitchen tiles and grabbed her arms to avoid crashing into the cupboards. I put the empty kettle on, squeezed the extra air out of the water bottle, threw a blanket over her shoulders, and handed her the hot water bottle. Careful, it's hot. You have to keep something between the bottle and your skin or you could burn yourself. Why do I keep wasting my breath? She never listens. I turned off the cold water in the shower and got my hand wet in the process. Better to turn it off before you get out. I grabbed her towel and went back into the kitchen. Gina was still wet and naked, holding a rubber water bottle at arm's length. Oh, shit, it was burning my fucking tits. She moaned. I figured it was worth getting into the swear box, and with a couple days of her being there, I could get enough to pay the next electric bill. I threw a towel over her shoulders and took the hot water bottle off her hands. Come into the living room, dry off in front of the stove, and get dressed, I turned, hoping she would follow me. She did follow. I put the bottle down in the chair, put her pajamas on top and left them to dry, and went into the bedroom to get the thick wool socks I had woven. They were a pair from the first batch I'd made, and they had shrunk too much in the washing process to fit me anymore. They would still be too big for her dainty feet, but since my sheepskin moccasins were too big to be safe, the socks could keep her limbs warm. She was shivering, so I helped her wipe her upper body, tied a towel around her waist, and helped her into warm pajamas. Then, on my knees and feeling all my joints creaking, I carefully wiped her lower half with the towel, completely without any arousal on my part. I was pleased with myself and my composure, but felt that perhaps it was because I no longer cared about her. I couldn't reach the pajamas lying on the heating pad, but she could, and she put them on, leaning on my shoulder for support. "Thank you, sweetie," she said with a smile. Yes, I remembered that smile. I tried to lock eyes with her as I helped her put on her socks. She leaned on me again as I pulled them on. I struggled to get up, but I could still see her smile, even on the inside of my eyelids. It made me angry for some reason. I thought I'd handled her nakedness so well, but I wasn't as invulnerable to her as I'd hoped. So I growled mercilessly, "I'm Harry, not nice, only my clients can call me nice man nut." I couldn't see her, but I heard her snort before she perked up and asked about the antique loom in an unlit corner of the living room. "What's that, H?" It was here when I arrived. There must have been weavers living here in the distant past. It needed repairing, and I read up on how to do it. I had something to keep my hands busy. I made new shuttles. There is an old lathe in the outhouse. I polished all the wood with beeswax. The old wood really turned out very nice. Wait till you see it in daylight. I'm no expert, but the farmer who owns all the land on this side of the canal gives me scraps of wool because the merchants only take whole fleece, and Joe the junkie leaves me marijuana stalks every fall, which I soak for weeks and then chop and spin the fibers into sewing thread on a repaired spinning wheel they stuck in the barn. Wow, what did you make on him? I helped her into the robe. This robe is made of wool dyed with blackberry and elderberry juice. All the blankets, the socks you're wearing, the plaid in the chair, the rug in front of the fireplace, almost all my sweaters, all my socks, a few scarves and hats. That's a lot of stuff. I've even made thick coats of thick beeswax dense fabric, waterproof on the outside, with soft cloth lining and pressed wool insulation in between, with rabbit fur collars. Do they sell them at the farm, too? No, I only finished 3, one for Cat Lady, one for Junkie Joe, and one for me. Won't you make it for me? Sure, I'll measure you before I leave. Oh, sure, thanks. I'll pay you. No, it wouldn't, it would be a gift, so paying for it would be an insult. Thank you, H. I'll treasure it very much. I'm going to bed. You need to prime the wood burner every couple hours, 2 logs at a time. Make sure you use a rag over the wood to open the door because it will be hot, and make sure you latch the door properly or we'll be breathing carbon monoxide for an hour or so before we die. Okay. Good night, Harry. Good night. The restroom, should you need it, is next to the shower. Other than that, don't touch anything, okay? Right. Don't touch anything. Sleep well. You too. XXX. It was already dark when I realized she was standing by the bed. You're on my side of the bed, she said. I think I just rolled over onto my back and mumbled something like, just keeping you warm, and didn't immediately realize she'd climbed into bed with me until I felt her bare frozen feet on mine and her bony elbows trying to move me further to the cold side of the bed. What the? I muttered, sitting up and turning toward her, which only resulted in her turning toward me and taking up even more of my warm space. You slept on my side, she insisted. No, in this house, in my house, you don't have a side. This side is the side closest to the door, the closest light switch, and the closest toilet. I've found I can't go all night without drinking. Honorable, you haven't either, have you? Yeah, me too. I slumped onto my back. Half of me was cold and half of me was warm, and a frozen inedible lump of meat made up of elbows, knees, and cold feet clung to me and sucked the heat from my old bones like a parasite. I was right, it was a parasite, my my still wife apparently. I thought about taking her to the canal and throwing her into the water, but remembered that it was solidly frozen and her body would be lying on the ice and therefore bleeding, which would be visible to passing joggers and inquisitive dog walkers. And in rural areas, everyone is a goddamn nerd pretending to be a caring citizen. You can get away with murder in the city, but not in the countryside. And in its gut lay the physical evidence of my involvement, my socks, my shower soap, my jam and bread. No, I will never get away with it, although my life sentence is unlikely to make much difference to my lifestyle or longevity. I decided that I would be visiting family too often while in custody awaiting trial, and decided it was generally best to let her live. As soon as I lowered myself onto the bed, Gina pulled my arm and put her arm around her. Thank you, Mavis, I said as casually as possible in a half-asleep voice, as if it were an automatic response to a familiar gesture that often occupied my thoughts alone at night, but Gina stoically bit her tongue in response. Still, it made me smile, and I knew she would somehow sense it and question whether it was a positive or negative thing about her attitude. When she didn't react to that stimulus either, only clenching her jaws almost imperceptibly, I had to suppress a giggle that I knew would make her mad, so I stopped suppressing it and laughed out loud. Okay, Gina, I laughed, what's going on? Why are you here? The fire went out and I put the wood in too late, she wailed. I waited for the fire to warm up again, but it was stone cold, and then I froze, very cold. No, not what just happened, Gina. I mean, what the hell are you doing here? We broke up 10 years ago, and neither of us has been in contact with the other since. You invited me here, for the christening, yesterday, she said quietly, so I went straight home, changed my clothes, packed for a few days, and came here as soon as I could. I didn't invite you to move in, Gina, just to visit in the future so we can talk, clear the air, but not now, but in a few months, at least a few days in advance so I can get over the shock of meeting you. Have I become ugly, Harry? She asked, nearly sobbing. Do my wrinkles, saggy tits and saggy ass annoy you? No, Gina, if anything, you've aged very gracefully, you're probably the best looking person I know. I'm 64, Harry, that's still early 60s. Ah, that might put you in a more competitive age category, I said. I mean, how old are Sigourney Weaver and Michelle Pfeiffer? You've become a very mean old bastard in your 80s, Harold Crabtree, she snorted. I'm in my 80s, Gina. And you basically put me out on the grass in my mid-70s. If it weren't for Mrs. What's-his-name and her impressive control of the sphincter muscles, I'd be completely free of female bondage to penile participation. I told you Julian and Jennifer are still together, in a forgiving and loving relationship. Of course they are just like you and me, but in this Mrs. What's-his-name is much cleverer than you, my former darling. She is the ultimate mistress, she has Mr. What's-his-name by the golden balls and religiously, almost reverently, Mrs. What's-his-name never misses my birthday or our annual anal ass day, ever. She encourages me to bomb her Malteser freeway from dawn to dusk. It's better than Christmas, which only comes once a year, and Mrs. Year-old fuck is multi-orgasmic. Not true, lover boy, Julian was an E. We're interested in anal sex, and Jennifer wouldn't even consider the idea. And neither would you, or at least you've never been interested. I was already awake, cold, and angry. That, my ex, is where you're wrong. A willingness to have anal sex shows true carnal devotion, and every birthday I like to paint her Cadbury's canal with cocks until the sunlight stops dripping from her devastated chocolate aisle. So next birthday just send me a card, don't stop by for a visit because I'm sure you don't want to witness me half-assing Mrs. Whitney's name Snickers in honor of our first magical shit-tickling experience. You disgusting old pervert, if you like stirring someone's shit, then maybe it's time for you to move on to the other side. Go to bed. I'm cold, I want to get warm and sleep. The cottage is cold in the winter. I'm used to it by now. Fortunately, you don't have to. You can go back to civilization and wake up to warm radiators every morning. I smiled smugly. Yes. I can tolerate it for one night. She was silent, so I continued, hey. What happened to the socks? I couldn't feel the heat from your feet, so I took them off. Is that why you turned away and propped yourself up on your elbows for a moment? I think so, yes. You're not going to kick me out again, are you? It's so dark in here, I hurt my toe on the way in. There are no street lamps for miles, but in summer the nights are lighted by all the boats on the canal. Come in the summer and I'll make a camp bed for you in the living room. Come for a fortnight, why don't you? Oh, is that another invitation to stay the night, H? Yes, you could look after the house while I spend my first vacation abroad in 10 years. By spring, I'll be able to renew my passport. Go somewhere off-season and take a cheap vacation. You're evil. Without my influence around you, you've become truly evil. On the contrary, Gina, my mean streak is entirely due to your influence. If you weren't in my life, perhaps I would be the nicer Bane single gentleman with no worries that I've always tried to be. Without Mavis and you, I might have had children who loved me and all your kids love you, H, but you're making life so damn hard for all of us. It seems very easy for them to ignore their father year after year. If only they would pass on the inner secrets of their successful isolation from their father to their mother, it would do me an even greater favor than they would otherwise. You're a horrible monster, H, I don't know why I love you so much. Keep looking for answers to that question, Gina, I'm sure they will come to you soon. They always say that in order to find a cure, you must first discover the cause. Good luck with that, to find it as soon as possible, for the sake of all of us. Good night. Minnie. Yeah, sleep well, X. Triple X. I went out for my 10K run, but was feeling pretty sluggish this cold morning. All my vigor and energy seemed to have left me. Such is the debilitating effect of anger, I guess. Most nights I didn't sleep well, getting up once or twice to eat a Billy Whiz, but Gina disrupted my entire existence. I had practically cut her out of my life, even approached a Villa board member I knew to change my season ticket to another part of the stadium so I wouldn't have to face her if she kept going to the stadium in the hope of seeing me amongst the 42,000 matchday spectators. I ignored all our joint bank accounts and simply transferred my state pension to the local post office and started a P.O. box there. Perhaps I didn't want to go home anytime soon, hoping she would leave, but knowing she wouldn't. I left just before 7, leaving her sound asleep, looking as if butter or Mr. What's-it-face had never melted in her mouth. I fired up the wood burner again. The old paper filters I used for sifting beeswax made excellent fire starters, and the dried bark made excellent kindling, plus a couple of thick, dense logs that would take at least a couple hours to melt. By the time I reached the entrance to the farm it was 8 o'clock, and I went into the farm store to buy the morning paper. The farmer saw me come in. I know his name, though it eludes me, and he knows mine, but we are forever stuck on the fact that I call him farmer and he calls me grandpa. Otherwise we're pretty polite but not chatty, a nod and a name usually ends our daily conversation, until now. Hi grandpa, he greeted me, and the greeting was twice as long as usual. I could sense that a response was expected from him. Hey, farmer, and stopped when Joni Mitchell's words came to mind. I don't think even the farmer's real grandfather ever put DDT on his apples. This farm had been organic since the Saxons first settled here until Christianity reared its ugly head and forced them to have only one day off work a week. Saw your missus today, Grandpa. Wow, she's a real piece of work. Didn't even know you were married, much less to a goddess, and he whistled softly between his teeth. His usual whistle evokes a fat finger and thumb and is probably loud enough to reach Hades. It always amazed me that his sheepdogs only have one head each. Yes, we both keep quiet about each other, knowing how intense jealousy always destroys friendships. She came here for shopping, didn't she? Yeah, it hit your credit score hard, completely filled your four-wheeled handcart, the one you usually collect firewood in. Did she get the paper? The newspaper? She bought a copy each of the national editions in Forbes Weekly. I usually read them and send them back unsold, but this week she beat me to it. She also took Lillian and Burns milk and bread orders with her. Who? Cat Lady and Junkie Joe have names? I never knew. Looks like she's planning to cook you a full English breakfast, including tomatoes, the first of the season from the vines in our heated greenhouse. They sound expensive. That's right, Grandpa, enjoy it. Yeah, well, see you later, farmer. Hurry home, Grandpa, it's still 6 degrees outside and your sweat is already cold. I don't want you to die out there. Thank you. And I left, having had the longest conversation with Farmer since I had arranged with him to supply my jam and honey for the second year I came here. Hey, GX, I'm home. I said as soon as I walked through the kitchen. Just going to take a shower if you have any hot water left in the tank. Be prepared for me to walk past you into the bedroom. That's not an invitation, by the way. You will not run, beast, she called from the living room, we have guests for breakfast. Cover yourself with a towel. The towels are in the bedroom and I'm already naked, I replied. Guests, for breakfast, in my damn house? She should definitely go. I can't stand it. I'm a fully subscribed practicing hermit, damn it, and my apartment is my monk's cell, my refuge from the cruel world outside. Damn. I can already smell the bacon frying on the grill. Looks like my idyllic lifestyle is coming to an end if she doesn't leave soon. Why, oh why did I allow myself to succumb to a false sense of security and invite that damn spider into my living room? She knocked on the shower door and handed me a towel. At a glance, I could tell she'd washed her natural gray hair and brushed it shiny, applied light makeup, and looked generally good for an old broad with a reputation for casually fucking employees. Hurry up, we have guests and I'm trying to keep things from burning. Why don't you install a gas stove instead of an electric one? Because the gas pipe doesn't run that far off the mains. If it did, I'd stick my head through it this morning. Beast, you'd do the same. Yes, GX, know this, remember this and get out of here as soon as possible, it may extend my natural life cycle to a decent existence. I'm trying my best to be nice, while you've really gotten nasty, H. You brought it all out into the light, Axe, I must have spent 75 years trying to hide it without noticing, but this is clearly the real me coming to the surface. Get used to it or get on your bike. I can get used to it, again H, if you let me, said Gina softly. Damn. You used up all the hot water again. I splashed around in the icy cold shower. I had a dark mahogany side table with 2 hinged flaps that I kept on its side against the wall. I'd only seen it open twice, the first time at the charity store where I'd bought it, and I'd never had a chance to use it. Gina spread a tablecloth on it, which I recognized from the bottom of my linen chest, set out cutlery, mugs, a teapot, a jug of milk, a dish of butter, and a whole loaf, sliced and toasted, in 4 places. I bought this table for $5 at a charity store in a nearby town. When 2 volunteers offered to carry it to the Rolls-Royce, they threw me a few dirty looks and seemed to refuse to take it inside. I had to tell them that although I was going through a difficult time, my 40-year-old roller was the love of my life and the last thing I could part with. They saw that the roller was spotless, even if I had gotten as sloppy as Catweasel. The table was damn heavy, I had to balance it on my 4-wheeled cart, but I got it to the path in one piece. The center flap was badly water damaged, the old lady who had it before me must have kept plants on it that she had overwatered. I thought I would have to recover it with veneer, but when I sanded it down I found that it was solid mahogany and therefore probably 100 years older than the sellers thought. The watermarks were removed from it and it was smeared with 20 coats of beeswax. Then I folded it up and haven't used it since. I recognized 2 of the hardback chairs that live in the living room anyway, and the third one usually holds my casual clothes for a night in the bedroom. The fourth chair I didn't recognize and assumed that Joe the junkie was sitting in it. I couldn't remember his real name, though Farmer had mentioned it only 20 minutes ago. Joe was sitting in it. The two windows under the veranda, which had been draft-proofed 1920s metal windows, now let in the low winter sun behind the backs of those already seated at the table. The stove still radiated heat, warming the living room pleasantly. The other two guests smiled at me as I passed by with my chest bare and a damp towel wrapped around my emaciated loins. We exchanged the usual silent nods, and I disappeared out of sight into the bedroom to change for the guests. I didn't really have any clothes for the reception. Hell, how could I maintain hermit status when I had guests over for breakfast? They've seen me practically naked, with a near-alive wife who is currently trying to turn my anchorite cell into a venue for home county coffee mornings. Before the end of the damn week I'll still be teaching quilt-making classes, and my jams, breads and honey will be sold at the WI Village Market in the library hallway on Friday mornings. "Hello Harry," said the cat's owner, Lillian, I think Farmer, as I came out of the bedroom in barely decent clothes. I could hear Gina rattling the pans in my kitchen. "I always thought you were Harry or Alfred and Bernie thought you were Jeremy or Raymond, but we never liked to ask since you were always so taciturn." She speaks. And in a crystal clear and educated voice. Who knew, who guessed? Well, Farmer knew, Bernie knew, and Gina bothered to find out, on her first fucking full day here, and now I knew who they were. I knew my life here was starting to take a turn for the worse. I was going to be turned into a gracious host and forced to become a conversationalist, when really all I wanted was to be a hermit wallowing in my own well-deserved misery. Oh, shit. And there was nothing I could do about it. All my insults went straight to her head. And I've never been violent. I'd have to get crafty and destroy her self-confidence, tell her how repulsive she was or something. I need to think this through. I don't want to destroy her, I still freaking love her and freaking hate her at the same time. All I want is tranquility in my world. "Nice talking to you, Harry," said Bernie, interrupting my thoughts by half standing and holding out his hand, which I took numbly. I always pictured him, if that's the right word, perhaps vocal would be more accurate, as speaking in blank verse, like a white Rastafarian or a gangster rapper, but he sounded like a goddamn high school math teacher. It was kind of frustrating. He kept talking through my thoughts. "My plants love your bees. In late summer and early fall, when daylight hours are shortened, my plants go into flowering mode and I open all the windows to let the bees in. It's great that you and Gina have offered financial assistance, it should help my research a lot." "Oh, financial aid? It's not a big deal. Gina, my love, would you like to lay out our plans in full?" I asked the witch I had once trusted unconditionally. "Sure, honey, go help me set the plates out and we can sketch out a plan while we eat breakfast." "What's going on?" I whispered, as the Wicked Witch of Chilton Hills was clearly throwing me right into it. "I'm not in a financial position to get a haircut. Bernard is a professor of plant genetics at an agricultural college. He is a licensed medical marijuana grower and is dedicated to breeding strains that are almost completely free of the chemicals that cause a high while still being as healthy as possible. They help children with epilepsy, seniors with dementia, and even help shrink cancer cells without chemotherapy." And wait till Bernie tells you about your honey. And Lillian only has 5 cats, not 50. I brought 2 plates for our guests, a full one for Bernie and a lighter one for Lillian. We sat down to a feast of hot tea, bacon, eggs, tomatoes, mushrooms, black pudding and sausages, topped with toast with jam or honey. The conversation was lively and interesting. Lillian was a former teacher at a very good local school and had a lot of interesting things to say about cannabis, its origins and history. Bernie was making breakthroughs in the medical use of marijuana and was very grateful that Gina and I were funding to fill all of his upstairs rooms with hot lamps, grow tanks, nutrients, etc. And first thing first, as soon as weather permits, we would install photovoltaic cells on the roof so that he would be self-sufficient in electricity and hopefully generate surplus electricity that Lillian and I could use. Being a world-renowned expert, Bernie did have a license to grow potted plants, which he assured me would never get you high, and being a scientist, he accounted for every stamen. He mostly grew seeds of his own varieties which he supplied to other medical labs around the world, and the ability to store batches separately meant he could grow only female plants in other rooms to supply resinous herbs that could be used by patients in need. He then chirped about the healing properties of my honey, especially harvested at the end of the flowering season. I always include the date on the label and use them in strict rotation, but apparently my honey, harvested in October, which he had stored for several years, buying it from a farmer until he had enough saved up for a full-fledged study, had been used in clinical trials this year, showing fantastic healing properties for almost every disease they tested on. As soon as they left, Gina wrapped her arms around me and kissed me fiercely. I was too exhausted from a couple hours of unaccustomed intimacy to resist. Being sociable, helping people advance their careers, talking to them and encouraging them to open up to you and feel good about themselves. That's the real Harry Crabtree I know and love, not the pathetic hermit you pretend to be. I was tempted to say, bah humbug, but she was right. It felt good to talk to people again. In Roadrunners, my regular running group, were usually too winded to talk much. Let's get cleaned up, Gina, and I'll take you to the roller to show you what there is to see here. She continued to kiss me. I'd rather we go back to bed. We can always go out during the day. Gina, me, look. Oh. Shit, I don't know. What am I supposed to do with you? Make love to me until our joints harden or turn into wobbly jelly? I tried, I really tried. I tried to make tender love to this woman, honestly. I had oral sex for a long time, trying to get in the right mood, trying to take my mind off all the years of hate and disappointment. I tried to reduce her in my mind to just a piece of pussy to play with, but I could feel the anger rising in me constantly, and I had to go back to the yoga exercises I'd started doing 10 years ago, trying to channel all that built-up anger. Just a pussy, I told myself. Gina was some weird pussy I'd picked up for one night. Here and now, I thought, I'll get her in the mood and then I'll fuck her from behind so I can keep my eyes closed and pretend she's some stranger, so I can stay cool and... No, that didn't work. I didn't have any experience. I'd never once in my life picked up a one-night stand or an anonymous chick to razzle-dazzle on. I'd only been able to make love with the ones I loved, and both of them had failed me. I had 2 long-term love affairs that turned to shit in front of my eyes without warning in both cases. I was totally fucked up. So I just tried to stop thinking and use her as a plastic doll to masturbate, and all I wanted to do was enjoy myself. I fucked her hard until I filled her pussy and let myself out. For me, it was just like I had imagined using a paid prostitute. I was enjoying myself, but it was no pleasure at all. She was crying. Shit. I must have let my anger get the best of me. I know I hadn't uttered a sound the whole time, and we'd always been pretty loud when we made love, back in the days when I really thought we were lovers and wanted to maximize pleasure for both of us. She was crying now. Apparently I'd always been a total disappointment to her. For 10 years her imagination had made me out to be some kind of sex god, and now she was disappointed. I knew I wasn't as good as Mr. Watchesface must have been, but then he had the advantage of 300 fucks with my then wife to hone his technique, while I was getting almost nothing, maybe a reluctant quarter of what he was getting. But then, Watchesface knew exactly what he was getting: free entertaining pussy from his boss, on par with a daily account report, or whatever his job was. He had no expectations, so he had nothing to be disappointed about. And all this time I thought I was making love to the woman I'd loved for 30 years, the mother of half my children, and probably mistakenly expected her to love me to the grave, as our vows said. But all I got was a regular mercy fuck, like the equivalent of a Red Cross package to some poor unloved refugee. And at the time, I was more than grateful. Little did I realize that instead of a metaphorical dinner of a dish lovingly prepared to seduce and satisfy my taste buds in the name of love, I was settling for a TV dinner with a button. So our afternoon meal today between 2 people who had become complete strangers over the past decade couldn't convey what we had once enjoyed, because in both cases we were living a lie. Perhaps she felt she owed me something for her betrayal. Perhaps she needed a steady companion to share her old age with, and she thought I would be desperate enough to buy it. All I really wanted was to be left alone. I'd gone so long without sex that I didn't miss it at all. It was just a physical thing I'd stopped doing for a very good reason, and I was as comfortable not doing it as not shaving. Maybe she still wanted the magic I mistakenly believed we once had, and I thought I'd already found the peace I was looking for in the last 10 years. I lay on my back and thought I should say yes. Omething to this sobbing woman I thought I once loved, whom I had disappointed before and failed her expectations again, but what could I say? Hey honey, all my girls cry like that the first time? So not as good as fuckface used to be, or well, we tried, but when there's no love between us, the sex turns out just shitty or hey bitch, I pulled away, but it didn't do me much good either? I decided it would be best to remain silent on the subject. Eventually she stopped crying, and I got up to put away my breakfast things and go about my normal daily business, thinking that Gina would probably give up today, get dressed and go home, and that would be the end of it. I'll have to apologize to Bernie for letting him down on his derailed potty project. And I won't be getting any extra electricity. I put the last 2 logs from the basket into the wood burner and took the basket outside to refill it and assess the available stock. There were 2 stacks on the veranda by the kitchen, one fully seasoned, which should be enough to last until Easter, a second, larger one that had been stacked last spring, and a third one by the bedroom that I had stacked in the fall. That's a lot. When I got around the veranda, I felt cold, so I went back into the house for a cup of hot tea. I wiped down the empty table, stacked the leaves and dragged it back against the wall, probably never to be used again. As the kettle boiled, I heard Gina retire to the bedroom. I poured the tea, and as I was pouring the second mug, she came through the door and sat in the hard-backed chair opposite the wood burner, and I settled into the chair. I held out the steaming mug to her. "I'm sorry," she said. "You're sorry? What about the old ladies in the nursing home around the corner? Every day they lick their lips as I run my 10K past their door, looking all manly and masculine. I feel like I'm being turned into fresh meat under their baleful gaze, and I'm sure they want to make a club sandwich out of me. These old women outnumber the men in this place about 8 to 1. They think I can't hear them, but I know they're looking forward to the day when social services takes me out of here to move in with them. Oh my God, how disappointed they will be." "Ha!" She almost laughed, but a small smile gave her away. "It wasn't you, Harry, it was me." "No, Gina, it's me. I'm 84 years old, hell, I haven't had sex and I haven't wanted it in years, and I'm completely out of blue pills, not that I even have them. There's nothing wrong with your erection, Harry, you were hard enough, even too damn hard for that matter. We didn't make love, you just fucked me like I was nobody, a cheap whore you picked up for quick sex. Well, for that matter, I tried to keep my anger in check, to be as impersonal and unemotional as possible, but I couldn't help but think about fuckface what's-his name fucking you in your office all those hundreds of times. And as for cheap whores, I'd never taken a cheap whore in my entire life. And before I could bite my tongue and stop myself, although I've lived with 2 expensive ones. Fuck you, Harry." And Gina ran off to her bedroom, slamming the door behind her. It went well, but not like that. Well, back to the Hermitage. And I discovered it wasn't as good as I'd hoped. Pandora's box was now open, and I would never be able to ignore Lillian and Bernie again. Even my relationship with the farmer had to change. After today's grand breakfast, I would have to negotiate a loan, probably spreading the payments over several months. There will probably be questions and answers, and all of them will not be from the realm of Hermitage. I decided to pop into the nearest supermarket for tea and other groceries before I ran out of essentials and cash. I decided that I would give Gina time and space to think and perhaps decide that she had punished herself enough and wanted to return to her luxurious comfort zone for good. I pulled the notes I needed out of the cocoa can, put on my boots and coat, and headed to the farm where my trusty roller was stored in the spare garage. The farmer likes to pretend it's his. Maybe I'll leave it to him in my last will and testament, assuming of course I'm going to leave it to any of my ungrateful family. I know a lot of what I need can be bought at the farm store, but the prices there are exorbitant, and I've always been on a tight budget, which Gina was starting to seriously tighten, so I went to town on the roller coaster. After shopping, I stopped and had a coffee and sticky bun, trying to delay the inevitable confrontation with Gina or the grim undesirability of an empty house. I wasn't really looking forward to either. My credentials as a hermit in this parish were being seriously compromised. I carried home 2 shopping bags, breakfast cereal, cookies, tea, coffee, bread, cans of soup and some meat for the freezer. I never locked my doors, so I walked straight into the kitchen and found the whole house lights on and Gina was still there, cooking in my blazing hot kitchen. "Hi, honey," she said, You're just in time. I made chicken casserole with vegetables from the cellar. And I used the apples from your store to make apple pie. You didn't have any cloves, but I managed to get some from John when I picked up the chicken. John? I asked, thinking, who's John? John, from the farm store, you know, John, your landlord, the owner of the farm store? Oh, that John. Even the fucking farmer has a fucking name I didn't even know I had. I put down one of the shopping bags. This bag has whole wheat bread with a crust. It might go with the casserole. Oh, good, I couldn't figure out how to use your bread maker. I'll fill it up and put it on a timer for the morning. I don't usually use it until Sunday, but with you showing up, my days are all apart. I'll just take the rest to the freezer. There is a door in the kitchen that leads to the cellar. I keep a freezer there, and on one side of the cellar are racks of jars of honey and on the other side are racks of jam. I put my groceries in the freezer and then check on the honey. The honey used in the kitchen now and delivered to the farm store was July honey, harvested 3 years ago. That honey was hard and white and had too much sucrose in it, but both last year's September and October harvests were still liquid, with a higher proportion of fructose. This was the honey made by the bees in August and September. Both October batches of honey were much darker than the September batches. I took 1 jar each from August and September upstairs to the kitchen. I'll give them to Bernie, I said. He's not here, he's got lectures this afternoon. Said he'd be back around 6. The casserole is ready. Thank you, Gina. In fact, smelling that delicious aroma made me hungry. Okay, you're all skin and bones and need fattening up. Thinking of inviting me over for Christmas? I've been thinking about getting you all along, H. Gina, please. I think we learned our lesson this morning. Our ship didn't just sail away, it sank to the bottom without a trace. Impossible to save. I don't believe that. We've had 30 wonderful years. Less than 18 months while you were screwing your volunteer employee. Or you used your position to. I still made love to you, H. I never stopped loving you. Well, it means nothing if your so-called love for me was reduced to giving poor ignorant muggins a portion of careless seconds. Why the hell didn't you just be honest with me and say, look Harry, we've had a good relationship, I think I deserve a change and someone younger to float my boat, it's time to say goodbye. If you asked for a divorce, I could keep my pride and you could have your fucking what's-his name 4 times a week in your new apartment. At least then not all of your co-workers and even your temporary intern knew about your affair. I was shocked when the temporary intern told me all about it. I guess everyone else was on your side, knowing that I'm a silly old geezer who's clearly past his prime and you need some new blood or whatever it was that Fick Feathers was injecting into you. Well, Gina, how could I go back to work with all these people chirping behind my back, huh? Your carnal appetites have taken a toll on my ego. I'm so sorry, Harry, honey. I know I was being selfish. I never thought anyone would find out about it, especially you. I wanted us to spend the rest of our lives together. I still want that now. Gina, you certainly left me with the life I knew. That day my heart broke and died. My wife turned out to be a liar, my life turned out to be a lie, and my idyllic family life came to an end. Everything I had worked and lived for, you and my children. Now I don't even know if they are my children or not. Of course they're your children. Are they? How do you know if they need to be checked? No. I know they are your children, I have not the slightest doubt, believe me. Believe me, that's good. So I'm supposed to take the word of a cheat and a liar, someone who swore in front of our families to disown everyone else but any old Mr. What's-his-name she fancied when she wanted to get laid to make the day less dreary but it was too far to drive home, or call in a stupid husband to do something he's clearly incapable of doing to your satisfaction? First of all, they're both your children, Harry, Gina said quietly and carefully. I've had sex with 3 men in my entire life, the 2 I married and, unfortunately, Julian. I apologized and I really wish I had never done it, any of it. The whole affair is worth less than the 1 minute of heartache we've shared because of it since. Then it's a good thing the heartache only went to you, because like I said, it meant absolutely nothing to me. Fortunately, you never gave yourself to me completely, following your ex-husband's philosophy of boss, fucking suck and giving the faithful puppy at home a what fuck out of mercy every now and then to keep the home fires burning. No, it wasn't like that. The sex with Julian was just a distraction, partly because I was approaching retirement age and didn't want to leave the company or the band. You were already retired, and your sex drive had definitely slowed down. Then Giles decided he didn't want to run the company or the group, and I felt lonely, unsupported, and unwanted, and all the while my libido was rising. I wanted sex every day. The problem was that you were leaving the house at 6 in the morning and getting home at 9 at night, and you certainly didn't want to have sex with me that late. I supported you our entire married life, and you couldn't even talk to me for 5 minutes about what you wanted? Bullshit, Gina. We haven't even had lunch together, let alone questions about our marriage. Your job and what's his name were more important to you than me. Anyway, it's getting late for me, I'm going to bed. Leave the dishes aside, I'll wash them in the morning. Wake me up early and I'll wave cheerfully as you leave. You're impossible. No, the only thing I ask to enjoy the little time I have left is peace and quiet. Only you think that's impossible, while I've been thriving in it for 10 years now. You're here because you don't really love me enough to give me the peace I crave, and you selfishly force me to conform to your fucking plans because you don't want to be lonely in your old age. Good night, Harry, she snorted. Goodbye. Triple X. She never left. A couple hours later, she was standing by the bed waiting for me to turn over. Then she started finding things that kept her here, like the pot project. She installed some kind of signal booster to keep her cell phone working and ran her pot project from her new office, my former salon. 2 weeks later, the engineers installed solar panels on the roof of the cottages. Inside the house, we installed storage batteries in the basement and new plumbing, radiators, and hot water systems. And, like old lovers familiar with each other's plumbing, once we shed all the tensions and prejudices of all those years of separation, we found some comfort in each other again. Damn it! Don't you need planning permission for all this work, Gina? I asked. No, she said smugly, everything is done in accordance with the building regulations. I spoke to the planning department within a day of talking to Bernie and Lillian to find out what they wanted me to do to comply with the planning regulations. The staff told me that they thought they were quite reasonable and would just contact the foreman of the local company that does the installation. And John is pleased with you fiddling with his old cottages? Of course he doesn't care, for these are our cottages now, Harry. Ours? What is mine is yours. Damn, she set me up again. But it's an old cottage, built in 1780, of course. It's not listed, Harry, I checked with the planning officer. The canal and sluice gate are grade 2 listed, but the cottage has been subjected to so many unsympathetic alterations over the years that it has never been considered worthy of assessment. It took her 3 weeks to do it. She even brought in decorators to repaint everything and put new carpet in the bedroom, but I wouldn't let her remodel the kitchen. It was a real 1950s kitchen and it would have cost a fortune to remodel it retro. You're only here for a while, Gina, mind you, so leave my kitchen and basement alone, except for the battery corner. Figure out what my new rent will be after all the improvements, and I'll change the monthly standing order. She just smiled at me. Damn her. Epilogue. Wednesday, March 6, 2019, 1635 hours. I'm soon to be 88 and I have to admit that I'm slowing down a bit. I still participate in the 10K competitive races that the club participates in during the summer months, but I no longer win the over 75 years old category. No, I do extra training on Tuesdays and Thursdays in tandem with former Sergeant Charlie Bickerstaff of the Royal Artillery, who was 95% blind in Afghanistan in 2014. He is only 43 but has other head and brain injuries, so he can only shuffle, not run. It takes him almost 2 hours to run a 10K, but a perpetual smile shines on his face the whole way. Charlie is a pleasure to run with and the crowd that has gathered cheers us on the whole way. His wife Sally and 2 young children are great friends of ours and we see them all the time. The sense of accomplishment he feels from playing sports has given him and his family a new lease on life. So have I. I still run every morning, but now I only run 5 kilometers a day. I still run past the nursing home, but the old ladies don't seem to mind me, although thanks to the home-cooked food I force myself to eat, I'm not quite skin and bones anymore. Gina is in her 70s, but she never admits it and doesn't look her age. We kiss and cuddle a lot, a hell of a lot, to be honest, but we don't make love every day. If I'm feeling frisky, I usually slip a scoop of October honey into her coffee and she explodes like a damn firecracker. I soon realized that I have to drink my sweetened coffee at least 10 minutes before hers. I told Bernie about my suspicions about October honey, and he sent a limited supply of fall fruit jam made with October honey to clinical trials and confirmed that the results showed a marked increase in libido, especially in those over 60. Even if Bernie moves and takes the houseplants with him, I have enough October honey to last me until I qualify for the Queen's, or King's, 100th birthday card. I didn't tell Gina about the honey, of course. She had her secrets, and I had mine, but she'd been acting suspicious lately. Trust but verify is the golden rule of spouses who have partners known to cheat. I had just found out where Gina disappears to for 2 hours every Wednesday afternoon, driving away in my Rolls Royce. I followed her in John's borrowed Land Rover. He thought it was hilarious, at our age, to chase a wife suspected of infidelity. She was volunteering at a local nursing home. I managed to overhear the end of her performance. For those who need reminding that I'm married to the handsome 10K runner who whizzes past your door every morning, he's mine indefinitely for me, so hands off and eyes down, number 1. I think we have each other's numbers. The end.